Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the presidential election. How Jewish is this election? It really is mind-boggling to look and see just how Jewish the presidential election is. Who would have thought, even 20 years ago, that an election for President of the United States would be so heavily imbued with Jews, and that their Jewishness would hardly make a blip on the political agenda? Headlines around the world have touted Hillary Clinton as the first female candidate running for the position of the United States president. But she isn't. She's the first female candidate of a major party. Much less known, and almost always overlooked, is Jill Stein from the Green Party, the first female Jewish candidate ever to run for president of the United States. She ran before, and she's running now. The Jewish thread runs throughout the upcoming election, and most of the time, it runs totally seamlessly. Certainly, much attention has been given to Donald Trump's Jewish grandchildren, the oldest of them having just started Jewish day school. And one cannot forget Hillary and Bill Clinton's Machatanim. They are full-fledged, active card-carrying Jews. Bernie Sanders and his Jewish connections were just assumed by the mainstream press throughout his candidacy. It was young Jewish voters who felt his Jewishness most strongly. Sanders represented a new and vibrant Jewish model for leadership and a perspective that resonated with a Jewish-American blend that these, mostly first-time voters, had never been exposed to on the national Jewish political stage. Jewish is what counted, not Israel. And in and of itself, Israel is not high on the agenda of most of these Jewish Sanders or Stein supporters. And they certainly do not subscribe to a traditional Jewish communal point of view on Israel, a point of view that puts Israel uber alles. These voters are extremely critical of Israel, and that is part of what makes candidates Stein and Sanders attractive to what was, until now, a very small and relatively quiet part of the Jewish community. Stein is a typical American Jewish candidate for the new generation. The mainstream community has not embraced her platform. Actually, they virtually ignored her. There are many parallels between her platform and the Sanders platform, and she is making a play for his support. She has no chance of winning. At best, she'll hit 4%. Jill Stein was raised actually in the Jewish community of Chicago, granddaughter of Russian Jewish immigrants. Her mother's father was an Orthodox Jew who worked in the real estate business. Her father's father was an Orthodox Jew who was a tailor. She, however, was raised in the Reform Temple congregation in Israel, actually, on the North Shore, where social justice was the mantra. She was an undergrad at Harvard and continued on attending Harvard Medical School. According to an interview in the Forward, Stein attended high holiday services with her parents until they died. She described herself as strongly culturally Jewish. Analyzing her comments on foreign affairs, especially Israeli affairs, it is clear that Stein is extremely critical of Israel, even more so than Sanders. Sanders does not support BDS. Stein does. Stein has said that Israel committed war crimes in Gaza. Personal politics and professional platforms aside, we are still in a phenomenon, an almost fifth dimension of American politics. The connection of almost every candidate to the Jewish community is taken for granted. It's as if Jewish connection was always the norm in U.S. presidential politics. The subject is not discussed in the general press or even in the halls of power. No one even cares about Clinton's son-in-law or Trump's daughter or the Jewish lineage of Stein and Sanders. Think about it for a moment. Bernie Sanders, always Bernie, not Bernard, named his only child Noah Levy. Who names a child Noah Levy without knowing full well that the child will be seen and recognized by all as a Jew? The odd man out in this scene is Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson, who is even less known and less visible than Jill Stein. Of course, The Jewish media and the Israeli media have placed interest on the Jewish elements of Trump and his family and Chelsea and her in-laws, as well as Sanders. Even there, it has been more for the sake of entertainment and curiosity than as a vehicle to discuss issues. The mainstream press, even in Europe, where anti-Semitism is once again flourishing, has said practically nothing about it. The exception was Joseph Berger, who in the New York Times took umbrage when Bernie Sanders described himself as the son of a Polish immigrant. Berger countered by saying that no Pole would ever refer to his father Elias as a Polish. That is totally anathema to them. To them, he was a Jew. The tide has turned. In U.S. presidential elections of 2016, the Jewish angle vis-a-vis candidates has become ho-hum, matter of fact. It's a testament to the new status of the Jew. It is also a major statement about the Jewish role in politics and power. In the 1970s, the question of dual loyalty plagued the Jewish community. Could one be true to their Jewish values, included love and unflinching support of Israel, and at the same time be a patriotic American? That question no longer exists. On the one hand, that's encouraging. On the other hand, reflexive automatic support for Israel and love of Israel has now come into question. At the same time, I've been thinking about anti-Semitism. Yet while Jews are so accepted on the political scene in the United States, there has been a huge rise of anti-Semitism. Let me illustrate this with several examples. True story. Experienced travelers are in an international airport in a major European city preparing to board Flight 816 bound for Tel Aviv, Israel. The boarding pass reads Gate C3. Experienced travelers that they are, they watch the board for the inevitable gate changes and keep an ear tuned towards announcements that come over the PA system. Gates change all the time. They hear an announcement. It's repeated 3 times in a row. A voice is saying, Flight 816 to Palestine, boarding at Gate C3. The airport is Nikola Tesla International in Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. The airline is Serbian Airlines. How is it possible that at Nikola Tesla in Belgrade, on Serbian Airlines, Israel does not exist? And it's not an isolated incident. In the end, an investigation was conducted, and it turns out that the announcement was not made by the airline, but by a single employee of the airport who took upon herself to change company policy of the airline and the airport and perceptions of all the travelers to fit into her own. The Israeli ambassador to Serbia was notified, and ultimately the CEO of Serbian Airlines issued an official apology and clarifies that the content of that announcement was not airline policy at all. Another true story. A few months ago, as an Iberian airline passenger jet was beginning its descent into Ben Gurion International Airport in Tel Aviv, Israel, a member of the crew speaking to the passengers via the PA system in the airplane, welcomes them to Palestine. In both these cases, it was clear that the actions and announcements did not reflect the policy of the corporation, but people are making these statements in public, and a voice of authority with the official status conferred by the PA system. And another. Several Israelis were injured in one of the awful, ugly terror attacks that rocked Belgium. After a few days in the hospital, it was decided to transfer the Israelis back to Israel so they could receive better care. But in order to move them from the hospital in Belgium, the Israelis needed to be cleared by the national office in charge of coordinating the investigation and the victims. The Jewish community took the lead to pave the path to get these Israelis home. A volunteer called the office hotline to confirm that everything was in order for the Israelis to be transferred back. In the recorded conversation, you hear the voice of the volunteer, the Jewish volunteer, speak about going to Israel, and the official at the other end of the phone saying Palestine. Here's the transcript of the conversation. I want to read it. It's a translation from the Jewish newspaper in Belgium called Jews Actueel. The website is www.joodsactueel.be. The Jewish Coordination Committee volunteer begins the conversation. Good morning. I'm a volunteer for the Jewish Coordination Council in Antwerp. We have 2 Jews who were injured in the attack at the airport. The Belgian Federal Emergency Hotline responds, yes, go ahead. The volunteer then says, they are ready to be transported to Israel. Our volunteers are making sure that everything is in place, but received information from the hospital that we need a special permit from the police to get them released from the hospital. Whom do we need to speak with in order to get this permit? The hotline then responds, let me check. They need to go to Palestine? The volunteer pauses and says, not Palestine, Israel. The hotline then responds, yes, but it was Palestine before, of course. The volunteer says, can you repeat that for me? What's your name? The hotline says, it's Palestine. The volunteer asks, can I get your name, please? The hotline says, of course, my name is Zachariah. The volunteer then asks, and you only recognize Palestine? The hotline says, sorry? The volunteer then asks, you don't recognize Israel, correct? Only Palestine? The hotline says in response, I only know that the Jews went to live there, that Palestine accepted them, and that there is a war between Israel and Palestine, of course. And that's occupation. That's what's always on the news. The volunteer then says, are you able to assist me with my request? Hotline answers, yes, of course. They're returning to Palestine, and they asked if they can receive a permit. Of course, here it is. And the conversation, so to speak, ends. Even when they're non-intentional gaffes, or even gaffes spoken out of ignorance, statements like these become foundations for delegitimizing Israel. And they're becoming pervasive. They're becoming part of a cultural exchange in which it is acceptable to speak as if Israel, quite simply, does not exist. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. Both columns of the two columns I have today are from the New York Times. I know that many of you cannot stomach the New York Times, and in many ways you are correct. The Times has a perspective which is sometimes very hard to take, but nonetheless, it's still the New York Times. We need to engage and relate to what they are writing, even when it enrages us. First up is a column from the Sunday Review and was published in the print edition on 9/11, on September 11th. It came out online on Saturday, 9/10, September 10th. Online it was entitled, How to Celebrate Eid al-Adha Like an American. But in print it was entitled, Eid, an American Holiday. And it's by Wajahat Ali, who is the author of a play, Domestic Crusaders, and the creative director of Affinis Labs, a hub for social entrepreneurship and innovation. The thesis of the column is an important question. How do Muslims celebrate an important Muslim holiday on 9/11 and have it not appear as if they're celebrating the bombings and success of al-Qaeda? Ali begins. The Muslim festival of Eid al-Adha, which commemorates the end of the annual Hajj pilgrimage, begins Monday, September 12th. For a few weeks, it looked as if the holiday was going to fall on the day before, September 11th. Not ideal timing. On that horrific day 15 years ago, foreign Muslim extremists hijacked 4 planes and killed 2,996 people. And every day since then, American Muslims have had to ask, what can I do to make you stop seeing me as a security threat? Specifically, in my case, how can I, a dorky brown Muslim dude born in California and raised on Genesis and 80s action movies, make you feel comfortable when you see me board a plane? I guess one thing I could do is not celebrate a Muslim holiday on 9/11. Ali then explains the dates and the correlation, the lunar months, and that different Muslims begin the holiday at different times. He says that Saudi Arabia actually preempted the issue by declaring the Eid will take place on September 12th and not September 11th. Ali writes, however, Saudi Arabia preempted the controversy 2 weeks ago by declaring that the holiday would take place on September 12th. The decision coincided with the eventual sighting of the new moon, but it seemed as if the 9/12 decree was to avoid 9/11 overlap. Ali then concludes with George Bush and Monday Night Football. He writes, in remembering our American values, I'm reminded of President George W. Bush's address on September 12, 2001. He ended it by saying, quote, none of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world, unquote. He continues, If we sacrifice our religious freedoms at the altar of making people feel comfortable and safe, that sacrifice won't be touched by God's favor and replaced by a lamb. Instead, we'll have a hollow corpse of the American dream. For that reason, I'll be celebrating my Eid al-Adha loud and proud this year. I'm going to skip work, wake up early with my kids, dress my son in the traditional Pakistani outfit, head out to a banquet hall and celebrate with other young families. Afterwards, I'm going to eat some halal meat and ask my mom to send pictures from California of her biryani. I'll also donate food, clothing, and money to local charities. At night, I'll plop down on my couch to watch Monday Night Football. You know, like an American. This is a well-written, sensitive, and important argument. Second up is another column from the New York Times. This is about British anti-Semitism and the left. It was published online on 9/11 and in print on Monday, September 12th. The author is David Rich. Rich is the author of The Left's Jewish Problem, Jeremy Coburn, Israel and Anti-Semitism. He's the Deputy Director of Communications at the Community Security Trust, a group that monitors anti-Semitic incidents and provides protection services. Rich begins and lays out that Jeremy Coburn is simply an anti-Semite. He writes, opponents of Jeremy Coburn, the left-wing leader of Britain's Labour Party, usually claim one of two things about him: that his politics are extreme and will lead the party to electoral oblivion, or that his values are admirable, but he's too incompetent to put them into effect. Now Rich shows just how off base even his supporters are. He writes, for many Coburn supporters, talk of Labour anti-Semitism is a smear intended to silence advocacy for Palestinians. This segment of party members tends also to subscribe to a worldview that blames the United States and its allies, foremost among them, Israel, for all that's wrong in the world. They cannot even see the anti-Semitism right before their eyes, and they excuse it as anti-Zionism. This is how Rich concludes. Yet, there remains a strong progressive tradition among Jews that now has no political home. Their alienation from Labour is an ill omen. Whether British Jews ever feel that they can return to Labour will give a strong indication about the future direction and the character of the party as a whole. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. The first cartoon is by Chris Bach and creator Syndicated. It makes fun of the Iranians attacking U.S. ships in the Persian Gulf and the U.S. delivering large amounts of cash to Iran in the middle of the night. On the bridge of the U.S. destroyer, a voice tells the commander, "It's the Iranian Navy, sir," letting him know that the Iranian boats are close and about to maybe attack. The commander shouts the order, "Fire cash pallet number 1." And you see then a huge pallet of cash dropping on the little Iranian boats, who are shouting, of course, "Death to America." The next two cartoons are about the burkini, the combination of bikini and the Muslim dress burqa. This cartoon is called French Burkini. It's by Parish Nath, and it was published in the Khalij Times in the United Arab Emirates on September 2nd, 2016. A police officer is giving a ticket to a scuba diver. The diver says to the police, "Oh, officer, I'm a scuba diver, and this is not a burkini." It is very, very funny. The final cartoon is called Bikini Ban, drawn by Aaron Van Dam and published on August 29, 2016. A Muslim man holding a cane is telling 3 Muslim women. He tells them, 50 strokes of the cane if you're in a bikini on the beach. This is meant to show the congruity, punishing burkinis and bikinis depending on the world in which you live. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. Most people do not know this, but the first country to send a team of aid workers to help Italy after the terrible earthquake that devastated Italy and it struck on August 24th was actually Israel. Israel has volunteer teams that are always ready to hop on the plane and help people in need around the world. They were the first in Italy, they were the first in Haiti, and the first team of aid in Nicaragua. The team specialized in finding victims buried under the rubble and in dealing with Red Cross, neighbors, communities, etc. Knowledge of the victim's native language, in this case Italian, is essential. In Italy, one of the main foundations of the team is a psychologist named Sylvania Weiner. She came to Israel from Italy at the age of 20 years old. She did her doctorate there. Well done, Israel. We are very proud of you. Recently, Iran has released some damning public critique against Saudi Arabia. It might appear as if this is the standard stuff, part of the ongoing Shiite-Sunni rift. But it's much more than that. And the vitriol is far more biting. On Wednesday, September 7th, on the official Islamic Republic news agency, the IRNA, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani publicly said that Saudi Arabia should be held accountable for the deaths of last year's pilgrims during the Hajj, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca. Last year, 2,426 people were trampled to death in Mecca. The tragedy was allowed to happen because of poor planning. 2,426 is an official number of deaths, but there are estimates that place the number at 2 times that. 464 of the dead pilgrims were Iranian. Iran says that other Islamic states should punish Saudi Arabia. Rouhani is quoted as saying, regional countries and the Islamic world should take coordinated measures to punish the government of Saudi Arabia in order to have a real Hajj. This is just one example of the vitriol. For their part, Saudi Arabia declared that Iranian Shiites are not Muslims. Saudi Arabia Grand Mufti Sheikh Abdul Aziz al-Sheikh, the most notable cleric in all of Saudi Arabia, said that the Shiite Islam is not Islam, that the Iranians are not believers in the basic tenets of Islam. He called them Majus. The Majus were pagan fire worshippers and Zoroastrians. He said, quote, "We must understand that they are not Muslims, for they are descendants of Majus, and their enmity towards Muslims, especially the Sunnis, is very old," unquote. A new poll conducted by Israel's Channel 2 News has left me surprised. According to the poll, if there were to be an election today, Yair Lapid would unseat Prime Minister Netanyahu. Lapid and his party would garner 24 seats, up from 11 seats that they received in the past election. And Netanyahu and his Likud party would only get 22 seats, down from 30 that they now have. Another big winner would be Naftali Bennett and his Bayit Yehudi party, increasing to 14 seats from 8. Lieberman, the current defense minister, would also increase from 6 to 10. The biggest news is the big losers. Biggest is the Labor Party, now called the Zionist Union. They will drop from 24 seats to 13 seats. And the Kulanu Party, headed by the finance minister Moshe Kahlon, who almost would totally disappear from the map, dropping from 10 to 6. Polls are never something to rely on, especially this far in advance. However, one thing is very telling. Obviously, Netanyahu is in a low spot in his popularity, but not that bad. 22 to 24 seats looks more like a tie to me with Lapid than a total dismal defeat. The big news centers around the Labor Party, and even more so, Bennett gaining. Israelis like Bennett because he has no guile. He is direct and honest in his vision and his objectives. The Labor Party continues to fall. It seems that the party that founded and shaped Israel for decades is having difficulty connecting with Israelis today. Syria has just launched a tourism campaign entitled Syria Always Beautiful. It sounds crazy. I watched the video, and you can watch it in the background here. Looking at it, you would never guess that Syria has been at war for 5 years. The campaign pushes the beautiful beaches and the great historical sites of Syria. In 2011, before the war began, 8.5 million tourists visited Syria every year. That would amount to about 15% of their national economy. Since 2011, tourism has dropped to nearly nothing. The Syrians claim 400,000 tourists came in 2014. I find that number absolutely hard to believe. It's totally exaggerated. No way did 400,000 people visit Syria, certainly not tourists using passports. Maybe if you include the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the Hamas fighters, you might reach that number. The irony is that 400,000 is also the estimated number of the people killed by the war in Syria. September 29th, the busiest day in the history of Israel's airport, Ben Gurion International. 90,000 people going through Ben Gurion on that fateful Thursday, breaking the record set this summer of 87,000 passing through in a single day. The month of September will see 1.73 million passengers pass through the airport, a 6% increase over 2015, the last busiest month in history. So why September 29th? Because it's the last day people can leave or arrive in Israel before Rosh Hashanah, the new year, which begins on Sunday night, October 2nd. Flights are all booked way in advance. In addition to the many tourists entering Israel, many Israelis are leaving. Some leave for the holidays, flying away from anything remotely Jewish, and heading to beaches and gambling casinos. The largest amount of people leaving the country travel specifically for religious reasons. They're heading to the Ukraine, to the city of Uman, where the great Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav is buried, and where tens of thousands of his disciples descend during this period. This travel record is a huge boost for Israel. It tells Israelis that people are coming to visit, that their economy is getting a big shot in the arm, and that, despite the news, people still see Israel for her true self. People see Israel as a very attractive place to visit and support. It reinforces for Israelis the knowledge that Israel is a destination worth visiting. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information. Did you know that Benjamin Disraeli was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, first in 1868 and then again from 1874 to 1880? His father had an argument with the rabbi and the leadership of the Bevis Mark Synagogue in London in 1813 about his bar mitzvah that eventually led to the father taking the entire family out and across the street to the Anglican church, and they all converted. Had that not happened, Disraeli, a.k.a. the first Earl of Beaconsfield, could never have become Prime Minister because Jews were not allowed into Parliament until 1858. He was a very successful Prime Minister, however, suffered from terrible anti-Jewish sentiment. They called him the Jew. Benjamin Disraeli put the Jews on the political map in the United Kingdom. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jim, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.